We're going to have a super exciting session today, really on central bank digital currencies, the opportunities and the challenges. Really, it's going to be a really, really good time. I'm really excited today because we're here with Anders Brownworth. Just to give you a quick intro of Anders, for those who don't know him, he has a computer science background. He started on the Wall Street at Dow Jones. Then he went to the Bay Area for a dot-com boom and the bust. And then he came back east to ultimately head the R&D and for Bandwidth, which is a telecom company. He dove really into Bitcoin and ended up joining Circle, where we had Jeremy just on a couple of seconds ago. And he worked on many internal projects, including USDC, and most recently joined the Boston Fed to do applied research. One cool thing, by the way, we have in common, we're both big teachers, and he also Anders co-taught the first blockchain class at MIT. So Anders, great to have you with us today.
Great to be here. Yeah.
We're going to have lots of fun. And if any moment, by the way, Anders, you're not able to hear me, let me know if the good old technology of my old IBM ThinkPad is working well. And I think for those of you who don't know me, my name is Henry Arslan. Really, my passion in life is the future of finance. And I do this wearing many hats. One of them, I'm the global PwC, a crypto leader at PwC, where really over the last 18 months, we did over 350 crypto engagements. And I'm normally based in Hong Kong. But also I have my professor hat, where I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Hong Kong, where I've been teaching fintech and crypto for the past 5 years. Otherwise, I also have my author hat. I just saw somebody comment on it on my last book, The Future of Finance, which became a bestseller. And I'm working on my next one. I spent coronavirus pretty usefully on that side. And obviously, I have many other hats. One of them as chairman of the FinTech Association of Hong Kong. And the other one as obviously doing a lot of education, most notably with a lot of the work on social media. A lot of my shows, the FinTech Capsule and Crypto Capsules, that I know that many of you follow. So today, we're really going to have a super exciting session, talk about, CBDCs, what's the impact, what's the future, what you need to know. And our goal is very, very simple, is that you leave today, the session, and you have a very good idea of what, not only what the latest is on CBDCs, but also where the landscape is heading and some of the big dilemmas that we're having right now when it comes to the topic. Sounds good? Anders, you ready for it?
Sounds great. Let's dig in.
Cool. So just to kick off, we're going to do a little presentation on CBDCs, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. What we wanted to do was really give a little quick 5-minute summary to make sure that everybody's on the same page with regards to the latest when it comes to CBDCs. And I'm just trying to share my screen here, which I'm having some difficulties, but it's not picking up the slides. So what I do is, where do I start? And maybe Anders, before I get the presentation ready, do you want to give a quick summary of? I know you work at the Boston Fed. How is the Boston Fed different from the Fed that everybody knows? And just to set the scene until I get my slides ready.
So, So there's a bit of confusion, I think, maybe because the Federal Reserve works a little differently than you might expect for a central bank. It's not like a single entity. There are actually 12 regional feds, Boston amongst them. It's like Boston and New York and Philly and Cleveland and Richmond, Atlanta, Chicago, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Kansas City, Dallas, San Fran. So a bunch of places around the U.S. and if you sort of look at them on a map, they're sort of heavily, on the east and not a lot out west. It kind of used to follow population. It doesn't really, or really not so much population as much as the economy. It doesn't really accurately kind of reflect that right now, but sort of a vestige of the past. So there are these regional banks, and then there's, and they kind of compete in some extent. And then there's a board of governors that pretty much coordinates, system-wide things. So Boston is they call it the first Fed. It's the first one on the list. So I work for the Federal Reserve of Boston, and it's it's really a research organization. The best economists you'll ever meet. I mean, that's true across the system, not just in Boston, but some unbelievable people. I'm learning a lot. I should mention I'm relatively new in this. I worked with Jeremy and also with Dan On the last session, I always, I'll sign up to any session that I'm listening to them. That's a lot of fun. But anyway, had a bit to do with USDC, and kind of now I'm looking at that same sort of an idea, but from a central bank perspective. So what would it mean to kind of reach the next step in digital money? To be clear, like, we've had digital money for a long time. So it's really, this is what you're kind of talking about really is, well, what's the next step for the digital, digital currency or digital dollar?
Awesome.
So yeah.
So I think we'll come back to that with the Fed. And maybe what we were thinking is, for just everybody listening, Anders and I, is maybe putting our professor hats on and just giving a quick summary of where we are right now and where we came on CBDCs. Unfortunately, literally today is my unlucky day. I'm not even able to share the screen. So I'll simplify it, and I'll just give you guys just a couple of quick update on where we are. I know there's a lot of stuff going on CBDCs, so just to make sure that everybody is aware of where we are right now. So obviously, guys, there's a lot of, obviously CBDCs are a big topic of conversation. There's a lot of developments going on. I mean, literally, even this week, and we had the U.S. digital dollar proposal from Giancarlo, the former CFTC chairman. We had, what the Dutch came out with a couple of weeks ago. So there's really a lot of developments coming in the market. I mean, just to put things in context, today, 80% of central banks, according to the BIS, which is the Club of Central Banks, are conducting research into CBDCs. 80%. So I think it's very interesting where there's a lot of activity in this space. And again, just to give you a bit of the background as well, I'm not going to go through the history of CBDCs. The Chinese, the PBOC has been on it since 2014. There's been a lot of other initiatives, like the Fed coin and others over the last couple of years. But really, a lot of the activity really started picking up over the last 24 months. In many cases, we had, for example, the BIS openly say that we believe decentralized technologies like cryptocurrencies are a poor substitute for the solid institutional backing of money. We were just talking a couple of minutes ago on the previous panel how we have problems now with the banking system. But again, a lot of the traditional policymakers were kind of supporting the status quo and not really embracing cryptocurrencies. The same thing happened with ECB and others. It's too bad you cannot see my slides. I really, today I was hoping to present brand new slides for this conference, but it is what it is. Those of you interested, you can message me and I'll make sure I send them to you. But really, obviously, everything changed with Libra last June, Libra 1.0, where really we had a catalyst effect on this topic. But also, most recently, really, obviously, you had Donald Trump tweeting that the US dollar was going to remain the strong currency. We had a lot of letters from members of the Senate writing to the CEOs of a lot of companies, like for MasterCard and others, telling them that if they get involved in Libra activities, they should expect a high level of scrutiny, not only on their Libra activities, but all their payment activities. So obviously that spooked a lot of people, a lot of companies who are looking at the space. One thing that's been really interesting is really over the last couple of weeks, you've had a lot of policymakers look at the space very closely. The BIS came out on a report, what they called investigating the impact of global stablecoins. I mean, global stablecoins primarily was aiming at Libra, really saying that actually, the global stablecoins could pose a risk of currency substitution and obviously pose a risk to monetary sovereignty. We had afterward the FSB, really a couple of weeks ago in mid-April, say that actually stablecoins have a lot of risk potential to financial stability. Same thing afterwards, with the ECB that came out literally a day later, saying that there's actually the stability of bank funding could be weakened by the advent of a global stablecoin arrangement. So a lot of activity that came in, a lot of discussions with policymakers. What you need to know, obviously, there's two kinds of CBDC. Again, just putting the professor hat on for a second, you have obviously wholesale CBDC, which is a digital asset issued by the central bank that could be used that is used between a central bank and a financial institution that has an account at the central bank. So it really does not affect the public directly, but these are obviously transactions that are taking place between central banks. The thing that's important to understand is this is really the first category, but what I would say the most of the attention is right now is on retail central bank digital currencies. What is a retail CBDC? It's a digital asset issued by a central bank that is like a bit like that is a digital extension of cash that is used by the public and companies. And really, if you look at these two structures, at the wholesale CBDC, we're not going to talk too much about wholesale CBDCs today, but what's important, I think, for all of you at home is really there's really two big categories of wholesale CBDC. One of them is at national level, which you could use within the country, which frankly, while you look at payment systems within a country, they may not be perfect, but they work okay normally. This is why there's not, even if we put in tomorrow morning a CBDC to be used within a country, it's great, but it won't be a complete game changer. Where obviously there's been a lot of experimentations now with wholesale CBDC between banks and central banks have been really at the cross-border level. There's been projects like Japan and the ECB called Project Stella. There was a great report on that. More recently, probably one of my favorite ones is what Hong Kong, the HKMA did with Thailand. It was called Project Lion Rock Itanon. Very interesting model where they had operating nodes. So that's really, I would say, on the wholesale CBDC. However, when we're talking about real disruption, you have to look at the other categories. So it's really when we talk about retail central bank digital currency. There's different kinds of them, but I'm really there's three different main categories that you need to be aware when it comes to the space. The first one is what we call the two-tiered issuance, which is when you issue a central bank digital currency, but you do it via the regulated intermediaries in the system. And there's been a couple of good experiments of this. Probably the best one, the most recent one, is Sweden that launched this project called e-krona 2020. Sweden has a couple of pilots on this. The latest one is a two-tiered issuance, where you issue the central bank digital currency, but you use the existing banking system to do so. China is another good example. I'll talk about China in a second. I know many of you are interested in that. But I would say these are good examples. Also, for those of you who are interested, I highly recommend reading the white paper that came out this week of the digital dollar that also uses a two-tiered issuance using the traditional banking system. So that's the first one. And many would argue that that's probably the safest option for a central bank to do by using existing banks. The second category, so the first one is two-tiered issuance. The second category are what we call synthetic CBDCs, synthetic central bank digital currencies. What are these? These are actually a CBDC that is issued by issuers that could be not only financial institutions, but probably non-bank fintechs. That is very similar actually to what we call a narrow banking model in the US, where the 100% of liabilities are covered by the reserves at the central bank. And really the goal is to facilitate payments. Probably the best examples we had of this was really the IMF that proposed this model of what we call the synthetic CBDC, which is kind of, they kind of brought this forward at the forefront with this model. So again, it'd be like any company could issue the stable coin or the synthetic CBDC, but they will have access directly to reserves at the central bank, which would make it different from the stable coins we discussed earlier that have their reserves at a custodian or at a traditional bank. So there's a bit of difference from that perspective. And the last model, which is super exciting, and I'm sure we'll talk about it today with Anders, is what we call the platform approach. This is really where the central bank, to simplify, creates this tech platform with a CBDC functionality, which allows private sector firms to come and connect inside this platform. The best example of this is most recently is what the Bank of England has been doing. So the Bank of England, again, in this latest proposal they did a couple of months ago, proposes this platform model. And also the Swedes before that, they actually probably got inspired quite a bit from Sweden in 2018 that had a very similar model as well. It really hurts me that I'm not able to show you guys the slides. You know, I had really very good slides to explain, so I really apologize for technical difficulties I'm having here. The other thing you need to know is there's also token-based and account-based. These are terms that for a lot of us in the CBDC world, we use these terms a lot. What is a token-based asset? It's basically a token-based CBDC as one where it can be described as a prepaid value that can be stored locally, whether it's on a card or an app or a mobile phone. It could also work offline. It's very similar actually to a paper money. So if I give you a $10 bill, it's token-based, the value is in it. The contrast to that is what we call an account-based. So what is an account-based issuance? Is really when the issuance can be described in the form of a balance that is found at a central register maintained by an intermediary or a central bank. Again, so what happens is that the account is maintained there, and you still need to be connected to this account system to be able to use it. There's pros and cons to both of them, and we'll discuss in a couple of minutes with Anders. But just to put an example, today when you have a $10 bill, that's a great example of an asset that is both token based, which if I give a $10 bill to Anders, he has it as long as he knows that it's not a fake bill. He holds the value of it, but also account-based by the bank accounts that we have today at various places in our bank accounts and other places. And I'll just wrap it up with two updates as well on conversations that we will for sure will come up today, which is Libra 2.0 and what China is doing with DCEP. So Libra 2.0, as you guys know, a couple of weeks ago, Facebook really came out. Let me be very careful. The Libra Association came up with the 2.0 version of its white paper, where really they moved from the model of this Libra coin that they had, which was a separate digital asset, to a model of a digital composite that is composed of stable coins. So initially, they're going to launch a couple of stable coins, and the Libra coin now is not a separate asset, but it's literally kind of a digital composite that represents these assets. They made a lot of announcements that there'll be 4 types of participants, from designated dealers, regulated VASP, which is the crypto exchanges under the new FATF rules, certified VASPs, and unhosted wallets. And we can talk about this later on. But really what's important is that they will get regulated with FINMA. And of course, the blockchain will be permissioned. But one thing is very important, and what Libra 2.0 made very clear, they intend to integrate with central bank digital currencies. So very interesting what's happening from that perspective. Again, we'll talk about it in the next couple of minutes on Libra 2.0, but very, very important development where they move to the stablecoin model. And also they invite a lot of central banks to come and potentially join the Libra platform in case they have any concerns on dollarization. The second thing is really when it comes to China. I can say I've been, I'm a lawyer and a banker by background, and I've been living in China, Greater China now for over a decade. Actually, I went to study Chinese law back in the day. Really what's interesting is that really China is, in my personal opinion, probably way more advanced than any other country when it comes to retail central bank digital currencies. Obviously, they've been working on it since 2014, 6 years ago, at the policy level from Xi Jinping, really kind of embracing blockchain to really Bitcoin being removed from what we call the National Development Reform Commission, then the RC list. There's been a lot of developments going on to even literally a couple of weeks ago where the Central Bank of China, the People's Bank of China, officially confirmed that they will launch this pilot. What is this pilot? So basically, it's going to be launched in 4 cities: Shenzhen, Shongan, Chengdu, which is the panda city in China, and Suzhou, which is the Venice of the East, as some explorers in the past called it. So really, the pilots will be launched in these 4 cities, but the goal is very clear: is to replace paper notes and coins. So really, it's at the very, very M0 level. It's going to be permissioned network. And really, the goal is they're gonna distribute it via the commercial banks and tech firms initially, not by the central bank. So again, I'll stop it here, and I really apologize, guys, once again that my slides are not working for reasons I completely ignore. So maybe let's kick it off with this, Anders. Obviously, this was a very quick summary of where we are right now, and obviously, I just want to bring it to you, Anders, and just let me share with us. From a technical perspective, there was 3 models that I just described. The 2-tier system where we go via the banks. There's a synthetic CBDC like the IMF model, and there's a platform model that the Bank of England was proposing. From your perspective, from a technical perspective, what model of retail CBDC do you think has the most chance of happening first that you believe and we'll see in the foreseeable future?
Yeah. So real quick, 2 notes up front. As you mentioned, I'm definitely a tech person, not a policy or whatever. I also don't speak for the Fed. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not here to announce that we're doing anything in particular. However, on those points, technically. There's not a huge difference, I suppose. There's, especially when you talk about account versus token model, there is an analog in the crypto world. The token model would be Bitcoin, UTXOs, unspent transaction outputs, and you just have a mess of them, just like you might have a stack of $20 bills or something like that. So they are things that will be spent and they are completely spent. You give somebody $10 and they have it, you don't. It's not like you rip it in half. You may get change back, but then that's a different token that you get back, just like in Bitcoin. You send a UTXO, you might get some change back. whereas Ethereum would be the account model. In which case I have an account and the numbers can go up or down, but it is a single account. When I spend from that account, I don't kill the account or, spend the account down to zero like you might with Bitcoin. Those two models are not really all that technically different. They're different clearly, but in terms of effort to roll them out, they're not huge. Where they are well down the line changes. If you have a UTXO system like Bitcoin, you might have millions and millions and millions of outputs, and they could all be essentially under one entity's control or not. It could be, you don't know, they could be spread around. Whereas with accounts, it's you're probably not going to have that many accounts comparatively. So that's the difference there. There's also, you'll hear a lot about a layer 1 solution and a layer 2 solution. That's a lot more like, I think, what you're talking about here. In this case, a layer 1 solution would be everything is direct. A layer 2, that could be, you could think of that as a bank or a lightning node, or whatever, sort of like a second layer above a chain below. And those are obviously much more complex in the sense that you can deploy many different technologies in different layers. Another way to think about this is, of course, payments. You can do payments through a state channel, which would be something like the Lightning Network on Bitcoin. That technology can kind of, change and swap as long as the layer below, continues and maintains. And technically it's probably not a huge difference in effort for which one you kind of go with. But if we're really talking more like a layered thing where it's layer 2, you could probably change out the stuff in layer 2 with a lot more regularity than you could with the underlying chain. So long-winded way of saying, it's not huge, but there are very slight differences, I suppose, technically.
And actually, on this point, Anders, I think you raise a very good point, which is obviously with layer 1, layer 2, or the token-based, account-based. While my laptop is falling down, so the question, there's a big element as well, which is the financial inclusion element, right? And many will argue that yes, token-based, because I can own the asset, obviously allows better financial inclusion, which is a problem. We're seeing right now in the U.S. with the whole issues with the IRS need to send 100 million checks to people to receive their stimulus payment. But also on the account base, which obviously has its pros and cons as well. But for example, it reduces the risk, arguably, of money laundering or transactions happening without traceability. What do you think? Do you believe that actually CBDCs give us a good chance in promoting financial inclusion? Let's start with the U.S. and then we can talk about some of the other countries as well.
Yeah, sure. It's a question of design, right? You're generally trading off privacy and different, kind of levels there. There are definitely many levels of privacy with convenience and inclusion concerns. Another thing I think you mentioned earlier on was, what about offline payments? That's a big thing for inclusion. And offline payments, you can sort of think about that as a device that has some limited capacity to move money without being connected to the network. There's really interesting thoughts on the ways you can do this safely. It's never going to be 100% safe because if something is offline, you do run the risk of double spend. So, kind of where that lands, I think is, I think we're very much at the beginning. You said 80% of the central banks out there are looking at this. And yeah, we're all looking at it. It's very, very interesting. It's still a relatively new space. And, we're really trying to understand it. We're trying to understand what the new options are, what cryptography gives us, but also critically to do that safely. How do you actually roll something like this out without, violating trust, which is the most, the most sacred thing.
But I think, I think it's a good point on the financial inclusion element, right? Because generally it could be very helpful from that side. And actually, maybe for the audience, I highly recommend, we won't have time to discuss it today. I see some of the questions. There's some people from the Netherlands, but really, I'm amazed how the latest paper by the Dutch central bank is actually excellent, because it actually proposed the dollar amount, euro thresholds, and actually take the step of addressing this issue, which I think in true Dutch fashion, they were too humble and they didn't do the marketing well enough. But a very excellent, really white paper to the people at the Central Bank of the Netherlands. On the money laundering issue as well, I think that element is going to be very interesting, because obviously when you talk about the US dollar, it was not by design made to be confidential or private. It just happened that it was like that. And then we tried to come up with frameworks to try to avoid money laundering and terrorist financing and so on and so forth. So I think it will be very interesting how we deal with this, either putting limits to how much you can use as a token-based asset, bigger amounts have to go via an account-based model. I think it will be very interesting on that perspective. Which brings us to the next point on the digital dollar. I mean, very interesting what happened, Anders. I mean, very keen to get your view on what do you think of digital dollar? What do you think what's interesting in it, and just your views generally on that.
On a digital dollar, and are you talking about the digital dollar paper that just came out last week? I hate to admit I haven't had time to completely read it, but it's first of all, right. So somewhat of a history is important here. We've had digital dollars for a long time, a very, very long time. How do we implement something that ultimately kind of moves us as a society along to a more efficient system? I mean, we've known about, for example, relational databases. We've known about relational databases, how that technology works for like 40 years. It's extremely fast. You can settle transactions in milliseconds. You can shard it. You can, distribute it. You can it's a pretty mature technology. And indeed, that's how digital dollars exist in the world right now. They're in centralized databases, and we can do money movements. Are there things we can do to improve that? Certainly. The question is really, what's best in the, sort of the panoply of new options that we have available, looking at this whole industry, where can we pick and choose and what can we move forward? Now, you can't just throw down on something and say, okay, this is definitely, you have to take a measured approach, and you have to build these things out and test them and be quite sure of what you're actually going to roll out, because again, it comes down to trust. You need to, put something out there that's going to be trusted and, used and practical and actually be, a very significant step forward for, from what we had, or else why?
It's actually interesting on that point. A lot of central banks, they're actually, the whole point is to make it independently from the existing payment system, right? It kind of offers redundancy as well, but also it needs to be able to stand alone on its side. I want to discuss a bit Libra, but actually there's a good question here, I think, from the audience, is from Hector Cardenas. Hector, thanks for your question. It's if a CBDC becomes a reality, what will be the role of commercial banks in the game? Great question. And by the way, if you have other questions, feel free to ping them, and we'll make sure to address them over the next couple of minutes. Do you want to take a first tab on this, Anders, on the role of commercial banks?
Sure. Yeah. It totally depends on how you actually implement it. One way you could think about this is to say, look, cash is kind of obsolete in itself. So let's make a digital version of cash. That could be something that you might do. If you did something like that, well, how do you get cash out there? Do you go to commercial banks to get cash? The commercial bank doesn't print the cash. You can make an analog and just do it, directly that way. But it doesn't necessarily have to be just like cash. Cash is very convenient, certainly works peer-to-peer without being connected to a network, and has some very interesting capabilities, but that's not the only way that you could roll something like this out. You could definitely do it where there's a central bank and you have other, commercial banks are the only ones essentially allowed to have accounts there and do it. It just totally depends on the way you roll it out. And I would argue, that really ultimately it doesn't matter really from a technical perspective. It's not really that big of a deal, but you're going to pick something and go with it. So really just what's going to fit the medium best, I think. And those decisions are economists, and at the Fed we've got the world's best economists, and I'm getting an education in economics there, which is extremely fascinating. And that's the kind of thing that they're going to do. I'm looking at what are the options technically, what can technology do?
Maybe and just to add on that point as well, I think you raised it very well. I think just to for Hector for your question as well is. It's funny. All my last conference I've been speaking with, there's bloopers or microphones falling, stage falling. One thing is we've been. I think another very important point is really what happens to the commercial banks on the wholesale funding level, right? So obviously today, the people are depositing money at a bank, and if people will actually be able to redeem money that is deposited with a bank right now, commercial bank will need to actually get funding on the wholesale market, which will probably raise the cost of funding of a bank. So there's a lot of considerations from that perspective as well. The other one, I think, in my conversation with a lot of policymakers really comes up a lot is really the risk of an acceleration on the run of the banks. So today, if I don't trust the banks anymore, I can go to my ATM and whatever money I have, I can try to get it out of the ATM and come put it in my apartment. But there's a physical limit to how much money you can put, and also the safety reasons and others, how you can do this. Whereas, if we were moved to a CBDC era, whether I store $10 or $10 billion on my device doesn't make a difference, right? So I think that's one of the big risks of acceleration of the run of the banks. This is why a lot of the conversation around retail CBDC right now are whether we put a cap on the amount of a CBDC somebody can use, for example. So it doesn't accelerate the run of the bank. And obviously it raises a lot of policy considerations and other questions along those lines. I'll come back, Sean, to your question in a second. It's a very good question. Just want to ask you, Anders, before we move to Sean Stapley's question on Libra. So obviously Libra 2.0, I gave the 10-second summary earlier on. What's your view on that? From your tech perspective and from your new role, how do you see it, Libra 2.0?
Yeah, Libra is very interesting from a technology perspective, mostly in my opinion, in the sort of the way money is programmed. They've done a rethink about how what the core building blocks should be of a programming language if you were to be moving money with that programming language. And they came up with this project called, or this language called Move, and they wrote a separate paper on it. It's actually an open project that they want you to be able to use even outside of Libra. To me, that's the most fascinating thing. It's incredible, and I'll give you a reason why. Because if you have let's say created an ERC20 coin on the Ethereum network, you define a bunch of functions, and now you have your coin. If you should happen to forget to overload what happens when you send, Ethereum to that contract, if you forget, what do you think Ethereum would do? Well, you would imagine that Ethereum would, hopefully at least kick the money back to you, or throw up some kind of a red flag. It doesn't. The default is to drop it, essentially make it unrecoverable, which is, it's not a great default, but it's also, emblematic of a larger problem. And that is in the middle of an operation of inside of my little ERC20 coin, if I happen to deduct the money from one account to add it to the other and my program crashes right in the middle, where am I there? Or my program exits before it doesn't atomically swap. So there, what Libra have done with Move is made a language, a whole sort of way to operate that makes dropping it on the floor essentially impossible. You control the creation, you control the destruction, and then the smart contracting language can kind of do whatever it needs to do, which critically does not involve losing it. So I think Libra is really interesting from that perspective. It's just absolutely compelling.
And I totally agree. And also, one thing I always say that if it was not for Libra, I always say jokingly, we should all send a bouquet of flowers to Mark Zuckerberg and David Marcus and the team, because the conversation that we're having on CBDC would have not been on top of the agenda if it was not for Libra. So you may like it, you may hate it. One thing is, for the ecosystem perspective, it really brought on top of the agenda, which is very exciting when we look at the future of money from that perspective. Let me take a couple of questions are coming in, Anders. I think we have less than 5 minutes, 4 minutes left. So one of them is question from Sean. Great question, Sean Stapley. Is if CBDCs become more commonplace, what role do you think private stablecoins, Circle, you were there, will have in this new reality? Why don't you take this one first?
Yeah, so I had a part in creating USDC, so I sort of had a front row seat. You could take the opinion that a central bank digital currency, well deployed, makes stable coins obsolete. My guess is that's not the case. I think stable coins optimize for a very particular, kind of a thing that they do. And even if all the central banks had, central bank digital currencies, and there's some way to atomically swap everyone with everyone, I don't think we'll get there anytime soon. But let's say if that were the case, I think the stable coins will specialize. Just to a large degree, they already have. And this is what was interesting in the last session with Dan and Jeremy, and they were talking about that essentially. These coins specialize for certain purposes, and I would imagine that's what would happen. Now the question, I think Jeremy said, like, you're not gonna have 500 coins. You probably have 3 that take 95% of the market. I think that's probably right. But I don't see it going to 0 at all, because I think they specialize.
Hey, Anders, we have 2 minutes. So I want to ask you a quick question from Macaulay, and then I want to ask you about China as well. So the question is to summarize, about DAI. What do you think about all these decentralized currencies like DAI?
Yeah, I think DAI is an absolutely compelling project, certainly from a technical perspective. I think it's optimizing for a specific use case, and I particularly in inclusion. When you talk about inclusion, that's right up their alley, and I think it's really compelling for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we're having a presentation afterwards on DAI. I think Mauricio's on the line. Great example of country like Argentina and others, Venezuela, where this has a great purpose on that side. So very exciting. And maybe to wrap it up, I think we have 1 minute left, Nathan, right? Is basically on China. So, living in Hong Kong, I get asked that question all the time about China DCP and the role, the impact. What's your view on this, Anders? I mean, do you think where China is heading on it? Do you think they're ahead of everyone else, like I mentioned at the beginning? Do you agree with me on that? And also, what's your view on what's happening with the China digital yuan? Let's call it like that.
Yeah, I think China is certainly ahead. You have to look at what they've done and what they're doing. I mean, they're not rolling out a nationwide central bank digital currency right now, but it is essentially mandated by law that you must accept this in the 4 regions you mentioned previously. So I think that's very, very important.
What's exciting right now? What's keeping you up at night, and what's really exciting you in the ecosystem right now?
I audit this class at MIT about the advanced cryptography and just kind of seeing what is possible, what this technology can ultimately do. I think it's compelling. We're a long ways off from seeing a lot of this stuff implemented, but learning with errors is a fascinating field, quantum resistance, et cetera. Like this stuff is really amazing what we will be able to do. So I'm very excited about that, coupled with programmable money in general.
Yeah, it's too bad we didn't have the time to talk about programmable money, as I think it's such a fascinating topic that comes into it. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Anders is a very exciting guy. One of the many things he has, for those who don't know, he's a federally licensed helicopter pilot, and he actually has flown under the Golden Gate Bridge. So here you go. He taught people at the Boston Fed were not fun. Here you can prove it wrong. Mason, before I pass it back to Anders, was good to see you again. And guys, really, I apologize for the video technical difficulties. I don't know what happened today. It was great seeing you, Henry Arslan here. And Mason, I think the microphone is back to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks so much, guys. That was awesome.